Hi, I'm Nick Palmisano.
And I'm Matt Finney.
And this is the Bad News Network. It's been another wacky week in coronavirus news. The president's been on a roll this week. He started off by saying, when it comes to dictating whether or not the country opens or closes, the president's authority is total. This, of course, is not true. We have a separation of powers in this federalist system that we live in, and anything not specifically enumerated in the Constitution falls to the states. Among the things that very clearly falls under state authority, even during times when the president has declared a state of national emergency, is what courses of action the governor is going to take to ensure the health and safety of the people that live in his state. The president has no legal ability to supersede that authority. So if California wants to shut everything down until December, they can, even if the rest of the country decides that they want to reopen in May. Now, we're not even going to get into the weird flex that California, Washington, and Oregon knocked out this week, where they have like a confederacy of states that is making their own decision about the well-being and health. Like, that's a weird thing that harkens back to a dark time in our country's history, and they probably should be more careful with those kinds of names and those kinds of motivations. Now, if the governors decide that they're just going to kind of do this to spit in the eye of the president and show that they're making better decisions than the federal government, cool. But all of this talk that they're going to essentially split off and create their own country, have their own government, that's a kick-ass way to start a war. We're not going to do that, right, fellas? But enough about that. Those are just governors flexing non-existent muscles. Another weird thing that happened this week is the president decided to add his name to every stimulus check. Sidebar for a second. There are so many times the president does things where if it was anyone else but the president, he'd be that guy that you and your friends are sitting around on the porch and somebody just goes, "This f***ing guy." That's what I think of when I think of this kind of move, like putting his name on every check. This f***ing guy. The balls on this guy. All right, back to the story. Anyway, allegedly adding his name to these checks delayed the sending of the checks by a few days, so people had to wait a little longer for their money. The idea here, I'm assuming, is that everybody should know that Donald J. Trump is the guy that's doling out that cash. But the fact is, this is actually your money, and the government is just giving it back to you. So if anything, it should be your name on the check, because the government is literally paying you back with your own money that you just gave the government. In small business news, the PPP program that we discussed last week is already a dismal failure. Why? Because in the first 72 hours of the program, there were $1.8 trillion in requests. The program was only allotted $350 billion. They are out of money. If you haven't received a loan yet, you're shit out of luck. President Trump announced this week that because of the World Health Organization's poor performance, he is suspending all U.S. assistance to that organization pending a budget review. It's a weird flex, especially with everything going on right now, but that organization isn't exactly the Mother Teresa of organizations. They are clearly unduly influenced by China. With that in mind, some people think that if we pull out, then China will have complete authority over the organization, as they'll be really the only major funding source. But if we pull out, do they have any legitimate authority anywhere? It's a weird one, and we'll see how this thing develops. And now for some good news in Corona land. The U.S. appears to be at or close to its coronavirus peak. And let's face it, far fewer deaths than expected, far fewer cases than expected. This is all a good thing. These improvements in the models, of course, have led many Americans to pretty significant anger. Why? Because they've watched their life savings go down the drain, they've watched their businesses fall apart, all due to government intervention. Many believe that the government has overstepped its bounds with this virus. After all, the Constitution clearly grants us the right to assemble, and that's pretty much been eliminated during this event. On the flip side, our representatives are charged with the protection of the people that have voted for them. So a ton of people have reached out and asked me, where do I fall on this spectrum? What do I think? How should it all work? So now I will editorialize. I always tell you when I'm about to editorialize, so here it comes. A lot of people pretend that the choice between quarantine and keeping the country's economy running is a black and white one. If you want the economy to keep on running, you're a selfish, capitalist prick, a-hole. If you want to shut it all down, lock people in individual rooms, and then seal that with an additional key, then you're a white knight. But the reality is that there's a lot of gray area. Unemployment, especially the levels of unemployment we have right now, with 22 million people unemployed, leads to suicide, homelessness, hunger. It's not a small problem. In fact, with the model having fewer and fewer people dying from the actual virus and more people unemployed, it's entirely possible that we will have more people commit suicide as a result of the government shutdown than actually died from the virus. But on the other hand, suicide is always a choice, whereas being afflicted with a virus, getting sick, and then dying is not a choice. We don't want to see anybody afflicted with this thing. We don't want to see people in hospitals. We don't want to see people on vents. So again, super hard to kind of balance all of this, right? There isn't a single clean answer, and people hate that. Sweden, for example, has opted to use their citizens' social and civic responsibility as the guiding post for how to act. They haven't shut down their economy at all. Instead, they told people, hey, look, the only restriction we're going to put on you is you can't get into groups of 50 or more people, because the data shows that when you do that, this thing skyrockets exponentially. After that, they just provided guidance. Hey, if you're an employer and you can let people work from home, you should do that. If you're elderly or you have a pre-existing condition, you should work from home. But they haven't shut down grocery stores, they haven't shut down public transportation, they haven't shut down anything. It's purely on you. Make the adult decision for the betterment of society. So what's the result? Their deaths per million is 63. It is definitely higher than the adjacent countries of Finland and Denmark, who have completely shut down. However, it's far better than France, far better than Italy, far better than Spain, and it's kind of on par with the United States. So did America do the right thing? I tend to think we did in terms of action, but I don't necessarily love how it was executed. North Carolina made it a hard mandate to stay at home only this past week. But we've been doing the same thing for 6 weeks when everybody said this is what you should do. I can tell you that nothing is different this week than it was last week. I'm a maximum freedom kind of guy. The government absolutely should be warning of a threat, should be educating people on what the threat is, but they shouldn't be going out there arresting people for executing their constitutional rights, even if those people are assholes for doing so. The government should not be arresting surfers on beaches, ripping dudes off of buses and throwing them on the ground, breaking up assemblies and saying that those assemblies are not essential actions. The government should not be ticketing people walking down the street. The government should not be going to private property and breaking up parties. Now, don't get me wrong. If I look over and my neighbor is having a party with 30 people with a devil-may-care attitude, like who cares about this coronavirus, I will think my neighbor is an asshole. I will not like my neighbor. I will probably not deal with my neighbor in the future because I now know the content of my neighbor's character. That being said, I'm not picking up the phone and narking on my neighbor either. This isn't Nam, there are rules. We're almost through this. Keep doing the right things, keep those elected officials in check, and let's get ready for the American and the world economies to roar back to bounds we've never even seen before. In the immortal words of Chumbawamba, we got knocked down, but we'll get up again. You're never gonna keep us down. In other good news, Boris Johnson is out of the hospital, so he can finally contribute to that herd immunity he was such a huge fan of a few months ago.
For thousands of years, dogs have been seen as man's best friend. Except in China, where up to last week they were known as livestock. In light of the pandemic sweeping the globe, one province in China has decided to reclassify dogs as pets. China's Ministry of Agriculture said that they no longer fit the definition of livestock. Instead, they're going to be called companions. It's taken years of companionship and fierce loyalty, but dogs have finally won their right not to be served with a side of wontons. Animal rights activists and critics praise the move as a step in the right direction. Although only one province thus far has decided to make this move into not turning dogs into food. It is still believed that 30 million dogs and 10 million cats are killed for food across Asia every year. Bats, it appears, are not commonly on the menu, but are still wonderful additions to milkshakes. The world's biggest pork producer, Smithfields, is shuttering one of their largest plants indefinitely. There have been a number of coronavirus outbreaks amongst employees, and the company warns that this could cause meat shortages throughout the U.S. Smithfield is currently idling its Sioux Falls, South Dakota pork production facility, which accounts for 4 to 5% of the U.S. production. First toilet paper shortages, then pork shortages, next meat shortages. Hunters everywhere will laugh at the situation, however, as they sit in their camo and say, "I told you so." Meanwhile, the rest of us will be forced to live on a diet of vegetables and candy while resisting the urge to try vegan foods.
And if you're interested, Smithfield is no longer an American company. It's now owned by China. The Shanghui Group purchased the company in 2013 for $4.72 billion. China first fudges the numbers on the coronavirus, then downplays its threat to America, and now is forcing the prices of our meat to skyrocket. We will not forget this. But humans aren't the only ones that are suffering from wage losses and food shortages.
Marina Kaspari, the director of the Neumünster Zoo in Germany, has said that the pandemic has directly affected the zoo's ability to care for the animals. She openly suggested that they might have to feed some of the animals to some of the other animals, or just put them down like Harambe in an effort to have them avoid starvation. This would be catastrophic PR for any zoo in the US. But because it's Germany, everybody's just kind of shrugging their shoulders and going, "Yeah, this sounds about right."
Meanwhile, in America, we're dealing with another animal problem that reeks of a horror movie. Because restaurants are shut down all over New York City, there's less food waste hitting the streets. So the rats have less to eat. Naturally, that means that rats are engaging in cannibalistic rat wars, with the bigger, stronger rats teaming up on the weaker rats to eat them. Bobby Currigan, an urban rodentologist, which is a word I never knew existed until right at this moment, has been studying this new phenomenon as the circle of life for the rat world has changed drastically. I can't decide if this story reminds me of the zombie apocalypse, Soylent Green, or maybe that cool BBC show Planet Earth. I'm also pretty sure it was explained as a good situation in Skyfall. But in the immortal words of Charlie Brown, oh rats.
The U.S. Postal Service recently claimed that it'll be running out of money. They'll be insolvent by September, unless they get $25 billion of cash and a $25 billion line of credit to stay open and operating just like they are. The agency is burdened by hundreds of billions of dollars of debt and failing revenue. Trump believes the USPS loses money by helping out e-commerce giants like Amazon. It could also be that in 2006, Congress passed a law stating that the USPS had to pre-fund its pension program. This act stated that the USPS had to pre-fund their 630,000 workers for 50 years. No other state, municipal, or private entity has to do this. The Government Accountability Office estimates that of the $160 billion of debt, $119 billion is for padding the pension program.
Now, if the post office goes down, there's going to be some hits. In particular, low-density population areas are going to have a hard time replacing some of the services. Now, it's a big thing right now where everybody wants to privatize the post office or argue against privatizing the post office. Really what needs to happen is that Congress needs to make up its mind. Again, I'm editorializing right now. So there was a period of time where the post office was a government organization just like anything else. They didn't have a profit center. They just delivered the mail, and they adjusted the price of the mail roughly to, a reasonable amount so that they weren't just hemorrhaging money. Then Congress decided, hey, post office, you're allowed to run as a business. Great news, right? They could now leverage some efficiencies, make decisions, potentially improve the business. Well, they went to raise prices, and Congress said, well, you can't raise prices. So Congress hamstrings the post office and basically doesn't allow them to set their pricing, doesn't allow them to determine what days they're going to be open, doesn't allow them to make any actual business decisions, but then penalizes them for not making money. So I'm cool either way. We can either just say, hey, the post office is a cost center, it's going to lose money, but it's going to provide the service of delivering mail to the population, regardless of where they live. Or we say, post office, you're allowed to run as a business and you charge whatever you need to charge, hire whoever you need to hire, have whatever services, days, whatever that you want. But you can't have this hybrid where Congress hamstrings part of the post office and then expects it to be profitable. Like, it's a bunch of bullshit. And once again, I place this problem firmly on Congress's doorstep and not on the post office. Make a decision what you want this organization to be and let them be that organization.
A friend of Ranger Up, William Marshall, living overseas in Hong Kong, gives us an update. As the virus goes, things are doing much better there. They've had their first week of low single-digit new infections. So that's good news. Now for the rest. The new head of Hong Kong and Macau affairs, a Beijing rep, is calling for the immediate instatement of a new law. This law is an anti-sedition, treason, and national security law. This same attempt caused massive protests back in 2003 and is likely to do worse now. The central government in Beijing is targeting pro-democracy people and elected councillors as national security threats. They are also trying to get Hong Kong judges to resign so that they can replace them with Beijing elected officials. What could be so bad about that, other than the legally declared imprisonment or slaughter of opposition to a tyrannical, bat-crazy Chinese government? Right?
Broward County Judge Dennis Bailey has had to issue an unusual order to all legal representatives. With the coronavirus going on and many people working from home, the standards for business attire have dropped dramatically. Judge Bailey put out a decree this week that all attorneys had to be fully clothed and out of bed before engaging in an online meeting. Why? Because attorneys, people that have gone to law school and ostensibly are professionals, have called in for hearings with a judge, shirtless, still in bed, tucked under the covers like,
I think my client is innocent.
come on, people! So to all the lawyers out there in Florida that now have to get out of bed and put on a shirt, literally no one feels bad for you. No one. People hate lawyers anyway. What are you doing? Put on a shirt. This isn't hard. When they're having a debriefing, they don't mean it literally, sir.
Devastation struck 93-year-old Olive Berenice, a Seminole, Pennsylvania woman this week. The woman got down to her last 12 cans of beer. Olive has a nice cold one before going to bed every night, so naturally, this was distressing. And when you're 93 years old, you shouldn't be going out in public when the virus is around. So she had a family member take a picture of her holding a sign that said, "I need beer." After going viral on the internet, Coors Light saw the picture and decided to step in. They decided to show up and give her 150 cans of Coors Light beer. This should last her another 5 months. Olive has been sinking cups in beer pong and shotgunning her ritual nightcap like a champ. Olive sincerely thanked Coors for their generosity and also tweeted Budweiser saying, "Ball's in your court now."
With all the social distancing stuff going on right now, Florida decided to go a different direction. Florida has deemed professional wrestling to be an essential activity. I can no longer watch football, basketball, baseball, hockey, MMA, but I can watch a guy climb up a ladder, pick up a chair, jump off that ladder and cram that chair into a guy's throat from 60 feet up, and I gotta tell you, at this point I'm down for it. Governor Santos said, look, if you look at it, at this point in American history, we've never had a situation where there was so little content available in the sports arena. I wonder if he knows that professional wrestling isn't actually a sport. But all you crazy Floridians, don't get excited just yet. The events are going to be held with no audience and minimal staff. Professional wrestling is joined by 2 other essential services: mental health organizations and drug rehabilitation clinics. So Florida has looked at the wealth of things out there and they've said, yes to drug rehabilitation, yes to mental health, and by golly, yes to professional wrestling. They call it the Florida hat trick. In this post-apocalyptic time, we want to thank Florida for remaining a beacon of entertainment.
On the lighter side of zoos and animals, the Chulu Hills National Park in Kenya was surprised with the birth of a zonkey. It's super rare and even crazier than the name sounds. It's like a griffin, but instead of the lion head, it's a wombat, and its wingspan only spans 11 inches as opposed to the 19 feet of a griffin. Just kidding, it's a donkey mixed with a zebra. Apparently the zebra got bored and moved into a community herd of cattle. This is where she met, got close with, and fell in love with the local donkey. If this doesn't sound super exciting, just remember that offspring like this sometimes have the abilities to get super powerful. Wesley Snipes lives like a human, but can fight like a vampire.
Citizens in Michigan have begun protesting the government for deciding what products are deemed essential and can be sold in supermarkets. What is going on, people? The protests have kicked off from both sides. One side favors opening up everything and just letting people do whatever they want. They especially don't think that a governor should be able to tell them that they can't buy certain products, which is kind of weird. I'm just saying, kind of weird. The biggest weird one is people are not allowed to buy seeds for growing their own vegetables. The other side thinks that those people are creating more problems and they should just go home and quarantine because that's what they were told to do. President Trump has encouraged these protests, which has added to the drama. I'm just making popcorn for what I feel like will be some kind of Gangs of New York style mega fight in a small town in the middle of the Midwest. Yes, that's right, the middle of the Midwest. I'm not taking it back. Anyway, probably won't come to that. It'll probably just be people doing this very aggressively at each other. But in the end, I'll still have delicious popcorn.
Virginia Governor Ralph Northam passed a number of voter reform bills this week. One of the measures includes the need for a photo ID in order to vote. He stated that photo IDs disproportionately impact low-income individuals, minorities, the elderly, and the disabled. All this potentially does is make voter fraud slightly more possible, which doesn't really matter because voter fraud happens at such inconsequential levels as it is. This is just adding to his crappy resume, like the time that the populists almost got enough votes to get him out of office, and he changed the law to increase the amount of votes that you needed. If anything, it just further shows that this guy is just wasting time and money on measures that help no one.
This week, an altercation on a train stop led to the death of 29-year-old Mamadou Baldi. Baldi, a Marine, approached bystanders and got into a fighting stance. He was clearly intoxicated and smiling, and other bystanders did not think in any way, shape, or form that he was looking for a fight. One of the men, who has not yet been identified, started punching Baldi and pushing him towards the train. His friend, 18-year-old Ryan Munn, also engaged Baldi. The two shoved Baldi in between two train cars, where he died instantly moments later when the train started moving. Munn has been arrested and charged with murder. His friend has not yet been identified, but will likely be found and arrested shortly. Munn told the police that he was only trying to hurt Baldi and push him to the ground. Mamadou Baldi served 2 tours in Afghanistan after enlisting in the Marines at the age of 18. Fair winds, sir.
With the coronavirus hitting states as hard as it has, some states have decided to let criminals go loose into the public. One of those states is the Sunshine State of Florida. 26-year-old Joseph Williams, along with another 163 inmates, were released from Hillsborough County Jail. He was initially arrested on assorted drug charges, including heroin. What did Williams do with his newfound freedom from the pandemic? He wasted no time in living his life to the fullest and finding the man who put him in prison, who lived in his own neighborhood, and shooting him to death. Shortly after the murder, Williams was identified as the suspect, arrested, and put right back into jail. He is now looking at 25 to life for living his best life.
Florida man strikes again, this time from jail. Guilford Joseph Abshire, age 53, shared a cell with his would-be victim. This Hell in a Cell match started with Guilford playing a tune with the old rump trumpet, and then following that up with a no flush on the old porcelain throne. This situation exploded further when the victim asked for a courtesy flush. That's when the shit hit the fan. Abshire began kicking the victim, who was in the bottom bunk. The victim stood up and then was promptly grabbed by the throat and thrown against the wall. The victim left the cell with 3 broken bones and a broken nose. Abshire seems to be a person who created a crappy situation. Sorry for the toilet humor. And with that, I'm Nick Palmisano.
And I'm Matt Finney.
And this is the Bad News Network. Our news is at least as bad as the news you're getting already, and we are taking 1 week break from small business shoutouts. They'll be back either later this week or next week, so keep them coming. Remember, you can get 25% off at rangerup.com when you use code BNN. Have a great weekend.